Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Sarah here in our BBC office in Washington.
And it's Anthony across the river in Arlington, Virginia.
It's about 10 o'clock on Thursday morning here, so about 3 in the afternoon in what some people like to call the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London. And the news this morning is that Donald Trump could be preparing to send up to 10,000 troops to the US-Mexico border. I mean, he's already ordered an extra 1,500 to go there, and they've to start building more physical partitions, not the actual wall, but probably some very, very big fences. And it's all part of actually a raft of announcements he's made on an immigration crackdown.
Right. He's effectively closed the border with Mexico. He has suspended the processing of all new asylum claims along the border. He's actually canceled refugee flights flying in from places like Afghanistan for already approved people who are going to be coming here. He also expanded a rule that allows the enforcement of immigration laws, not just along the border, but anywhere in the country where anyone who has been here for less than 2 years could be deported without any or minimal administrative processing. He has also suspended a rule that prohibited immigration raids in places like churches and schools. That is causing a great amount of concern among public school systems that are now worried that immigration officials are going to start showing up and taking away kids who are students who are in those schools. As you mentioned, there is the surge at the border with U.S. military possibly coming in. Donald Trump also has issued an order suspending birthright citizenship, something we've talked about before, where if you're the child of an undocumented migrant born in the United States, you're automatically a citizen. He has said that that will no longer be the case, although that's going to get bogged down in lawsuits very quickly. So of all the things Donald Trump has done, immigration seems to be the main focus. And he's done a lot, but immigration is the main focus of his early, most aggressive actions.
And actually, we've got a question about that from James, who got in touch with us on Discord, asking about the feasibility of these plans. He asks, Donald Trump said in his inauguration speech, all illegal entry will be immediately halted. Well, how? Asked James. He says, it's illegal. It's not like you can politely ask them to stop, and sending troops won't help much either. If people want to cross the border, they will go to any lengths. Now, I mean, that's true, James. People do go to quite extreme lengths to try and get across that border, especially if they've had to make a journey through Central America and the notorious Darien Gap, climbing through the jungle. It's a dangerous and hazardous journey that they make. So, Anthony, I mean, why does the Trump administration think that more troops on the border, more immigration and enforcement officials will make a difference?
Well, it's not just the troops on the border. The troops are going to be there to support the immigration officials who are already processing people that they capture along the border. It's also, as you mentioned, new barriers put up, and not just walls, but barriers, buoys put in the middle of the Rio Grande River, which is the actual border between the U.S. And Mexico in Texas, because American soil starts on the bank of the river, actually halfway through the river. So you have to stop them from even crossing the river. But more broadly, it is the way that the Trump administration views who is illegal, who is undocumented. It is not just people who sneak into this country, not in checkpoints, but people who come to this country and claim asylums, claim political asylum, saying that they can't go back to their homes. What Donald Trump has done in some of those orders I ran through earlier was he has made it essentially impossible to claim asylum for any reason along the U.S.-Mexico border. Joe Biden had already restrained that and minimized it, but Donald Trump has done away with it entirely. So when you hear the Trump administration, Donald Trump talking about ending illegal immigration, they're not just ending people who are coming here and sneaking and hiding. They're stopping people who are coming over here, setting foot on American soil, and trying to claim asylum as well.
Yeah, because it's a good point to make that actually a lot of the people who illegally cross the border then actually seek out border agents to say, I'm here and I want to claim asylum, and get themselves registered in the system. They're not all hiding from law enforcement. Now, of course, some do, and I'm sure they will continue to try getting in. Beefing up the border, whether it's with more physical barriers or more personnel, though, could make a significant difference, because it's really interesting when you go down there. And there are large gaps in the fence, in the wall, whatever marks the border at different places, and you very rarely see any border agents actually. Now that's partly because it's so vast, you couldn't have it staffed at every single mile of it, but there is every chance that that they'll stop more people coming in illegally. But also, what we haven't seen yet are some of the enforcement orders here inside the United States, where it won't be long before we get immigration raids. And as you said, Anthony, they can go into churches and schools to find undocumented migrants, as well as workplaces and homes. And there'll be an outcry when parents are separated from children, all sorts of, really kind of heartrending circumstances happen as people are yanked out of their American lives and deported. But that will be treated as a disincentive. For all that will be criticized for being cruel and heartless, that will be the point, according to the Trump administration, to try and put people off coming in the first place. So there will be an attempt at a disincentive as well.
Right. All of this is just an attempt to make every undocumented migrant in this country feel unwelcome and second guessing their decision, looking over their shoulder, and ultimately encouraging them to go back to their home countries willingly, if not forcibly, when they get detained and deported.
Now, Anthony, I assume you were watching Fox News last night, and I was going to call it the interview that Sean Hannity did with Donald Trump. I don't know if that's the right word, actually, because it didn't ask the kind of questions we would if Donald Trump came on Americast, that's for sure. It was very fawning, shall we say, with Sean Hannity really largely telling Donald Trump what a marvellous job he's done in office so far and how fabulous he is. But there was something really, really interesting that caught my ear in it when he was talking about Joe Biden, the pardons he gave some family members preemptively, and the fact that he hadn't pardoned himself.
Of course, comments like that are the reason that Joe Biden pardoned members of his family. I think he was afraid that he would be responsible. Joe Biden would be responsible for the prosecution, for the pursuit of members of his family. But as Donald Trump notes, Joe Biden didn't pardon himself. So in theory, it seems like Donald Trump is entertaining the idea of retribution targeted specifically against Joe Biden. Although, what he would investigate him for is, I guess, the big question.
He also made the point that because he'd pardoned family members like his brother James, his son Hunter, they cannot now claim the fifth and refuse to testify against Joe Biden himself if they come up with some kind of case and there is an accusation against him, maybe about Hunter's business dealings or something. Did Joe Biden profit personally from those? He was pointing out that Hunter could be compelled to give evidence in those circumstances because of the pardon. But there was something else I thought of, Anthony, and you tell me whether this would work or not. The Supreme Court gave that astonishing ruling in the summer that basically presidents don't do anything illegal whilst they're committing presidential acts. It's impossible to prosecute them for anything that they did in office. Does that not mean that Joe Biden will, be immune from any of this, looking into what he did over the last 4 years?
Well, it certainly, it would protect him if Joe Biden is able to make the case for whatever Donald Trump and his administration charges him with, that those were official actions. Now, the Supreme Court did not protect presidents from unofficial actions, things that they did for their private benefit, things that were not directly connected to their role as president. So in theory, they could dig back into Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's business dealings before Joe Biden became president. But you would have to make the case, and you'd have to spell out in court what is private and what is public, and that can be a kind of a tricky legal ground the way the Supreme Court has defined it.
Yeah, on the topic of pardons, Donald Trump, of course, issued those pretty much blanket pardons for the January the 6th rioters, including some of the most serious offenders, which has been pretty controversial. And Ashley has a question about that. She wants to know, if any of the Jan 6 criminals were to get charged again in future for committing crimes, can Donald Trump free them again? Is there a limit to his ability to free people? Anthony?
There is no limit. The pardon power is one of the broadest, most unfettered powers that a president has. So if any of these Jan 6 convictees were to commit another crime, a federal crime that is not a state crime, then yes, Donald Trump could pardon them again. In fact, one of the people convicted assaulting police during the Capitol riots, has been subsequently charged of federal gun violations in a federal court in Florida. So he is facing another round of trial and possible conviction. And in theory, Donald Trump, if he wanted to, could pardon him. I think it raises a larger question about, what are these people who participated in the January 6th attacks going to take away from this? If you listen to a lot of the leaders, the people who were involved in the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers, they have no regrets about what they did. They feel like they were justified in their actions in attacking the Capitol. So you could imagine a case where they do something like that again because they feel like there were no repercussions for what they did, that Donald Trump has essentially cleared them of any kind of responsibility or culpability for what they did.
Yeah, I was going to say it would be politically difficult to pardon them for crimes that, had nothing to do with Jan 6, were just, armed robbery or something. But of course, Donald Trump doesn't worry too much about that level of political controversy. And actually, that was something that Sean Hannity asked him about in that Fox News TV interview last night.
Well, if you see the video of the January 6th attacks, and I think most people have at this point, there were protesters who were spraying police officers with pepper spray. They were hitting them with poles and with even flagpoles or stanchions. There were police officers with broken bones. A police officer lost an eye. There were all sorts of bruises and lacerations and cuts. If you remember the testimony of one police officer during the January 6th hearings, she talked about how it looked like a battlefield with blood everywhere scattered on the steps of the Capitol. So, to dismiss this as generally minor incidents and nonviolent incidents, more than 100 of the 1,500 January 6th convicts, people who were convicted of assaulting police officers or some other violent act.
And there's another pardon that's proved a bit controversial as well. And in fact, we had an anonymous email about that, asking why Ross Ulbricht, who founded and operated the Silk Road website, was pardoned, and whether there was a different logic for that. The Silk Road was that site on the dark web where people could buy and sell drugs and I think other nefarious things. And he was convicted for distributing narcotics, I think, and was serving a jail sentence in America. So what is it about Ross Ulbricht, Anthony, that meant that he got freed?
No, he was serving a life in prison sentence for drugs charges, and Ross Ulbricht had become kind of a rallying cry, a martyr for libertarians in the libertarian movement and the Bitcoin tech community in particular. They viewed his punishment as being over the top. They view him kind of as a founding father of Bitcoin and a lot of this clandestine world of technology that is free from government oversight. That pardon is a reflection of an intense lobbying effort by the head of the Libertarian Party, by Ross Ulbricht's mother. For a number of years, they contacted Donald Trump and the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, actually, over the past few years, and pledged support for him, raised money for him, and kind of caught his ear. And then Donald Trump, when he went to a libertarian convention last year, he promised to pardon Ulbricht. He promised again later on at a Bitcoin conference, and so this was a promise Donald Trump made, and one that he kept fairly early on. I remember I was actually at a South by Southwest convention, I think 5 or 6 years ago, and Ross Ulbricht's mom was there lobbying people and speaking up about what she saw as an unjust conviction of her son. So this really was the culmination of a concerted, long effort to get him into Donald Trump's kind of orbit, and then to pressure Donald Trump and those around him to finally pull the trigger.
And of course, it's part of his new relationship with, everything online and all the tech billionaires that were standing behind him, but also, his outreach to cryptocurrency and all of these, that whole section of the voters and the electorate. Now, we haven't got Mariana here to talk more about that. But if she were, I think, one, she would ding the gong to say we're having our first mention of Elon Musk now. Ding, 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 ding. And she would probably tell us that, the undercover voters feeds, you can't move for seeing the video of Elon Musk doing, well, what may or may not have been a Nazi salute. And we have had a question about that.
Hi, Americast team. I'm writing regarding your coverage of Elon Musk's actions at the January 20th inauguration. The video clearly shows Musk performing a well-documented American neo-Nazi white power salute. This is not an ambiguous motion. He placed his hand over his heart and then extended it outward in the exact manner of a Nazi salute, and he did this twice. The combined motion of hand over heart to Nazi salute is what makes it the American neo-Nazi white power salute. Your coverage sanitized this event. Instead of acknowledging what the video plainly shows, you minimized an incident where one of the world's most powerful tech figures performed Nazi salutes at a presidential inauguration. The BBC has a journalistic duty to accurately report what happened, not sanitize it. The video evidence is clear. Your listeners deserve honest coverage of this serious incident.
Yeah, well, I'll pick this up, and actually I'll describe to you exactly how we try and work these things out, because I was sitting in an edit suite on Monday afternoon when that video came in. We had Elon Musk was at the Capital One Arena where Donald Trump went after the inauguration events, and before Trump had turned up, Elon Musk was giving a speech on stage, and he got very, very excited. And what he did was he kind of with his hand, he beat his heart on his chest a couple of times, and then he shot his hand outwards with his palm facing down. So immediately, this was grabbed by social media, and there were instantly lots of people saying it looked like a Nazi salute, and then other people pushing back against it. I would say we don't know what he meant. All we know is that we saw him give an awkward gesture. A lot of his body language was very awkward on stage, that resembled a Nazi salute. I cannot impugn what intent he had when he was doing that. So certainly on television, I think on this podcast, that's how we described it, was a sort of awkward gesture that resembled a Nazi salute. I mean, he didn't shout Sieg Heil or anything at the same time as he was doing it. And we were also very careful on television to show quite a lot of the clip, what he was saying just beforehand and how he behaved immediately afterwards, which will allow people to form their own conclusion, basically. I don't think it's our job to say what Elon Musk was thinking or what he intended. It is our job to show people what's happened and what's going on, and credit them with enough intelligence to make up their own mind.
Right. It's a tricky thing to cover, and like you said, it's difficult to put your mind into someone else's head and explain what their justifications are. And obviously there is additional context. For instance, Elon Musk has expressed support for right-wing movements all over the world, in the UK, in Germany. And so people will draw connections between that and his gesture and say this is further evidence to show what he was thinking when he was doing this. But again, that's conjecture. We can present the pieces, we can present the context, but I think ultimately the viewer and our audience has to decide. All right, well, let's go on to another question. This one is from Marika, who asks about the Episcopalian minister who made a speech during a prayer service at the National Cathedral that Donald Trump attended on Tuesday, and she appealed directly to the president as he was sitting just a few pews away.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives.
Now, what Marika says is, what a courageous bishop. I understand she had previously criticized Donald Trump. What did they expect her to say? And did the story get much coverage in the U.S.? Sarah, did you cover the story at all?
I did, although a lot of my coverage will have been consumed in the United Kingdom. But yes, it got a lot of coverage in the US. I mean, this was really striking. I certainly wasn't expecting it. I didn't know that much about the bishop before this happened. So I kind of had half an ear across what was happening. We were editing a television piece at the same time. And then it became clear that she was being really quite bold in what she was saying. We sort of stopped what we were doing to have a good listen and make sure that we included it in our reporting. And yeah, it's not what you expect from a traditional prayer service the day after the inauguration for her. And it wasn't just that line. You know, she was quite tough on Donald Trump and his policies, and also pointing out that he had said he'd felt the providential hand of God on his shoulder, that he claimed he was saved by God to become president after the assassination attempt in Butler, and that therefore, as somebody who had, you know, this renewed faith, would he please listen to God when it came to treating people well in the United States. He looked furious as it was going on. J.D. Vance, vice president, also sitting there, looked very, very unimpressed. And then there was quite a lot of pushback from Donald Trump and his side of the aisle. He said that she was a radical left hardline Trump hater, and quite a lot of Trump world agreed with that, and fervently attacked her and said it was inappropriate to be doing that. But of course, she's become a hero on the left to Democrats who think that this was exactly what they wanted to hear the day after the inauguration.
Right, and church services. I mean, there are always politics involved. If you go to a conservative church, you're going to hear conservative politics. Episcopalian churches tend to tilt more left, and this particular reverend obviously did have a history of criticizing Donald Trump. But to do it from the pulpit with the president there in the audience and direct your comments directly to the president did have an effect, and it did clearly anger Donald Trump. But it also expressed what I think a lot of people on the left are feeling right now, that Donald Trump is targeting the weak and the people who can't defend themselves, and that they feel like someone should be speaking up for them. So, you know, this is yet another early lightning rod, but I think it won't be the last.
And she said people are feeling scared. And obviously she meant people who potentially could either be targeted by immigration raids or lose protections or treatment, like transgender students, that kind of thing. But I think she summed up a mood of the people who agree with her quite a lot, where you not sensing that much anger or fury or resistance from the left at the moment, who are somewhat in disarray, but scared, I think, is probably the way to sum up the more liberal half of the country who are not in favor of what Donald Trump's bringing in.
Yeah, scared and asking for mercy. I mean, they understand that Donald Trump has a lot of power now, and he's exercising that power. And it's almost a reflection of the powerlessness of the left right now. There are no Democrats in control of any of the branches of government here in Washington, D.C. And so Donald Trump, at least for the next 2 years, is going to have the ability to move on a conservative agenda that Democrats, I think, are very, very nervous about.
And it's probably thinking about that that prompted Naomi to send us this question, which I think we'll be thinking about a lot for the next few years. And so she wrote in and said she's an avid listener, but she'd be interested to know the extent to which, as journalists, we worry about whether our approach to reporting on Trump and those around him might be normalizing their behavior. She says it appears that the majority of our commentary, whether from us or our guests, focuses on their audacity rather than acknowledging that it's at odds with the fundamental principles of democracy, like the rule of law, or giving consideration to what effect their decisions en masse might be. Is it fear of retaliation against us individually or against the BBC that's playing a part in our decision making?
I hope not. I don't think I'm concerned personally about any kind of retaliation. Now, if you go on social media and you read some comments, there are some very nasty things people say about me. I'm sure they say about you as well, Sarah, and anyone covering politics. But the job of the BBC is to try to present the story fairly, regardless of the consequences, present all sides of the issues as best we can. And I think that's what all of us strive to do every day we're doing this job.
Absolutely. And to do that and report without fear or favor doesn't mean criticizing things constantly. At some point, you know, we have to acknowledge that Donald Trump won the election with a significant majority, has a mandate to introduce all of this stuff. So it's not as though he is signing these executive orders, introducing legislation that's completely at odds with what Americans want. I mean, this is what people voted for.
No, I mean, the things that I think I find particularly noteworthy and outside of the realm of traditional presidential actions. I think the pardons were pretty dramatic, pardoning people who engaged in violent crimes for political ends. I mean, that I think is going to be something that the history books record. I think some of what Donald Trump has been trying to do to pressure the federal workforce and members of the federal workforce to report DEI policies and anyone engaged in DEI policies. But some of the things, changing U.S. policy on immigration, changing U.S. policy on trade. I mean, those things were what Donald Trump promised to do. They're within his power as president, and it's up to the political opposition to fight those, to block those, and to reverse them by winning elections going forward.
That's it for this episode of Americast as we approach the end of Donald Trump's first week in office. I'm sure there will be plenty more for us to talk about in episodes to come. If you want to listen to any of the ones we've done already, you can always find them on BBC Sounds. Bye-bye.